What's good, everyone? Today is the 27th of May, 2025. Welcome back. Hope you all had a good Memorial Day weekend. Of course, here in the United States, we celebrate Memorial Day with the greatest spectacle in racing, the Indianapolis 500, which will be the focus of today's video, and how it connects to the recent death of Indianapolis Colts owner Jim Irsay. We'll also be glancing at the numerology for the Monaco Grand Prix. Despite the fact that Formula One was on the other side of the world, the numerology for Lando's win in Monaco does connect us to the events in Indianapolis this past week. Now, you may also notice a familiar face on the bottom part of this thumbnail. That would be George Floyd, the man who famously died 5 years ago in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Last week, I appeared as a guest on Decoding with Cody, another fine channel that is raking in lots of views. Cody's an awesome guy. If you want to find this channel linked below in the description and this video, you'll notice that he put George Floyd in the thumbnail for this video. When Jim Irsay died of a suspected overdose last week, I made this post that we discussed in that video, and I explained why I thought this year's Indianapolis 500 would be connected to George Floyd. And we're going to recap some of this post regarding the death of Jim Irsay. Well, as it turns out, the Indianapolis 500 winner was Alex Palou, a native of Spain. He drives for Chip Ganassi Racing. And check out Chip Ganassi's real name, Floyd Ganassi Jr., which has a lot of similarities to George Floyd Jr., both men juniors, both men sharing the G initial along with the name Floyd. And given the fact that this was the 5-year anniversary of Floyd's death, May 25th, the date of the Indy 500. And of course, the race is 500 miles. So we'll be digging into the numerology of this race and the events in Indianapolis this past week. So for starters, let's talk a little bit about this. Indianapolis Colts owner Jim Irsay, dying at the age of just 65. A man beleaguered with several problems which appear to have caused his early demise. Now, what I talked about in regards to this story and how it connects to the Indy 500. This year's Indy 500 was the 109th running of the greatest spectacle in racing, and the number 109 appears to connect us to Yale University and their Skull and Bones Code. Yale founded on October 9th, a date that looks a lot like the number 109. And on the same day that an Indianapolis team owner passed away, another Indianapolis team, the Pacers, a team named as such because of the famous racing that goes on in the city, a man named Tyrese Halliburton scored a game-tying bucket as time expired against the Knicks, forcing him to make this choking gesture at the Knicks bench. This gesture was first made famous by Reggie Miller, who happened to be commentating the game at Madison Square Garden. But what I discussed is how this symbolism points back to the Skull and Bones Code, and Tyrese's age on the date of Irsay's death and making this symbol seems to prove that. Tyrese was 302 months and 20 days old on that date, the 322, the Skull and Bones number. The 322 is also found in the Gematria of Jim Irsay's father, Robert Irsay, the man who used to own the Indianapolis Colts and moved the team from Baltimore to Indianapolis. The name Robert Irsay gives us a 322. And in this year's Indianapolis 500, The pole sitter just so happened to be a driver named Robert. Rookie Israeli driver Robert Schwartzman took the pole in the race, ended up not finishing as he almost killed some of his pit crew members. But he was born 32 months and 2 days after the death of Robert Irsay, which essentially handed the reins of the franchise over to his son, Jim. Another important element of this code is the eclipses that passed over the United States in the last 7 or 8 years now. And the second of these eclipses passed directly over the city of Indianapolis, Indiana. On the date of that eclipse over Indianapolis star Tyrese Halliburton was 8,805 days old, syncing up with the Latin gematria of the phrase skull and crossbones. And this seems to be what he was attributing. Again, this was obviously a choking gesture, but that alone should stand out, because when Jim Irsay was found, he was struggling to breathe. So how did this connect us to George Floyd? Well, notice how the name Tyrese Halliburton gives us an 1190 in that trusty Latin method, matching the gematria of choked to death and the word choke. Jim Irsay's death was 119 days after the founding date of his team, the Indianapolis Colts. It was also 119 days before the pole sitter Robert Schwartzman's birthday. And that driver, Robert Schwartzman, in his native Hebrew language, has gematria of 1109. Of course, 119 connecting to the Star of David, which is the symbol on the Israeli flag. Jim Irsay's father even died 1 month and 19 days before his birthday. And this brings us to the Indianapolis 500, which was held on May 25th, the 5-year anniversary of the death of George Floyd, and they went racing 500 miles. There's a few more connections. I'll go ahead and refer you to the video linked in the description below if you want to see a little bit more. The one thing I do want to share here is the importance of the number 75, because this year's race was held on a date with primary numerology of 75. You also got to appreciate how if you multiply all of the digits in the date, you get a product of 500, the number of miles in the race. But this 75 is a particularly important number to the city of Indianapolis, which has gematria of 75. Indianapolis Colts, 75 in standard reduction. Colts, 705 reverse. The former owner, Robert Irsay, has a 75. And the race, Indy 500, when spelled out, equals 75. Jim Irsay died 75 weeks after he needed Narcan to recover from a previous overdose. And his death was on the same day the Indiana Pacers started their Eastern Conference Finals series against the New York Knicks. This team also with 75 gematria. And the star of the game, Halliburton, also 750 in standard. But what cements this connection is that the 75th prime number is 379. And using the prime number cipher, the name Halliburton equals 379. Colts owner Jim Irsay died exactly 379 sidereal months after his father, Robert Irsay. So, once again, we picked up on the George Floyd riddle ahead of the race. And then the race was won by a team owner named Floyd Jr. with the G. Chip Ganassi, by the way, celebrated his birthday just one day before the race, turning 67, a number which we will be discussing. Last month, on April 28th, the Iberian Peninsula, which consists of mainland Portugal and much of Spain as well as parts of France, suffered a significant blackout that led to widespread disruption around the peninsula. And we're going to talk about how this blackout in Spain is connected to next year's total solar eclipse, where the sun is blacked out. And one of the only countries that will see this total eclipse is the nation of Spain. Alex Palou, this year's Indy 500 winner, was born in Barcelona, Spain. And you may notice how this eclipse ends very close to the city of Barcelona. It actually seems to split Madrid and Barcelona there on the map. This being the 2025 Indy 500, notice how the name Palou in the standard reduction or Pythagorean forms of English gematria sums to 20 and 25. And this is all connected to the death of George Floyd and Jim Irsay, both of whom were found struggling to breathe. Now, a significant part of Jim Irsay's death was that he passed away on May 21st. And curiously enough, May 21st is the same date in history on which Alphonso Taft died. And Alphonso Taft, father of President William Howard Taft, was a co-founder of the Skull and Bones Society at Yale University. Sunday's race in Indianapolis was 229 days after Yale's October 9th anniversary. And again, October 9th, 10-9, similar to the 109th running of the Indy 500. In multiple methods, both ordinal and standard, the name George Perry Floyd Jr. equals 229 and 2029. The number 229 is the 50th prime number. And in numerology, the number 50 and the number 500 both break down essentially to the number 5, as zeros are customarily ignored in gematria. The winner of this Indy 500 was from Barcelona, which has gematria of 500 using one of the mathematical methods. Meanwhile, the winner in Indianapolis was Lando Norris, and the last name Norris also has that 500 gematria, which is perfect for a pair of races that took place on a date with multiplicative numerology of 500. Another word that sums to 500 in this trigonal method is the word sacrifice, and we'll see how this is heavily coded, along with the planet Mercury. And lo and behold, this race was held 5 years, 0 months, and 0 days after the death of George Floyd, like the number 500. 5 years is also 60 months on the calendar. And look what happens when you write out Indianapolis in reduction. It equals 60, whereas the name George Floyd Jr. equals 60 in reverse reduction. These two phrases also share gematria of 75. And look at this. On May 25th, 2020, when George Floyd was killed in police custody, Lando Norris was 7,500 days old, exactly. That same date was also 7 weeks and 5 days after Indy driver Alex Palou's birthday. 75 matching the date numerology of the race, and the value of Indy 500. And just as an aside, I don't have numbers on this yet. I'm going to be looking at it soon. But back in January, I actually made a video on sumo wrestling over in Japan about the newest Yokozuna. And on the same day as the Indy 500 this year, Rikishi Onosato won the May tournament in Tokyo. And as a result, he secured promotion as the sport's 75th Yokozuna in history. And, of course, that's a pretty rare ascension, a sport that's been going on for hundreds of years. But I thought it was worth noting that, yeah, the 75th Yokozuna crowned on this same day. But what I want to look at is how this all syncs up to the planet Mercury. Lando Norris, on the date of his win in Monaco, was celebrating his mercurial birthday. Now, of course, it's unlikely he was celebrating his mercurial birthday. He was truly celebrating his win, but those of us looking at the numerology will understand this connection, as Lando Norris was exactly 106 Mercs for the race in Monaco. Sunday was 19 months and 17 days after Yale University celebrated its 322nd anniversary in the year 2023, of course, which are essentially the numbers of the Skull and Bones Society. And indeed, events to this day are still coded to this date. The planet Mercury sums to 1917 in squares. Don't forget, this was the birth year of JFK, 1917, who also died on his mercurial birthday. Check out my last video on Pope Leo and the White Sox for more on that. Another significant number of Mercury is 86. We've recently seen some pretty interesting news stories connected to the number 86 and the sacrifice code. Check out my blog for work on James Comey and his 8647 Instagram post, which, as you may know by now, was made 8,647 days after the 9/11 attacks. Most people recognize this number as slang for offing or getting rid of someone. And it just so happens that human sacrifice and blood sacrifice share in 86. Well, the Indy 500 was won by Chip Ganassi Racing, which shares the number 86 with George Perry Floyd Jr. And the winning driver was from Barcelona, Spain, where the blackout affected last month. So as we see, Lando on his 106th mercurial birthday, which actually connects to Alex Palou, who picked up his 16th victory all time for IndyCar in that race. But the reason the number 106 is so important is because of Chip Ganassi, whose name in the standard English alphabetic order sums to 106. Not only that, but Chip Ganassi was born on a date with primary numerology of 106. In regards to this being Alex Palou's 16th IndyCar win, this is, of course, the fourth square number. 4 times 4 is 16. And 4 is the number on Lando Norris's car. Last year, Lando's first 2 F1 victories were 16 weeks apart. For a little more context, Alex Palou was not on his mercurial birthday, but he was 116 mercurial years old. And with this victory in Indy, it was Alex's first win on an oval track. So his first win and 16th overall at 116 Mercs. George Floyd was born on a date with primary numerology of 116. This also matches 500 in ordinal, and the city Monte Carlo. Monte Carlo is the site of the Monaco Grand Prix, which is, of course, Formula One's crown jewel race, sort of, much like the Indy is to IndyCar. I guess that association is a little weaker with Formula One, since this race sucks every year, but it does appear to be integral to the history of the sport, so they keep it anyway. And don't forget the 116, this is an upside-down 9/11, which points to ritual human sacrifice. The word sacrifice also equals 62. The last name Floyd has this 62, and it was in the city of Minneapolis where Floyd was sacrificed back in 2020, another 62. When you write out 500, it also equals 62 in reduction. George Floyd Jr. also 602. Well, the word sacrifice not only has this 62 value, but it also has a 226 in it. When George Floyd was born, Floyd Gematria was 5,622 days old. And when Floyd died in 2020, Gematria was 62 years and 2 days old. So he has the same digits in his age for Floyd's birth and death. The death was also 62 weeks and 2 days after Lando Norris raced in his first Grand Prix. And this connects to a theme I've been discussing with George Floyd for years. Because George Floyd was kneeled on after he was strong-armed to the ground. This connects him to astronaut Neil Armstrong, whose full name, Neil Alden Armstrong, equals 622 in the Latin cipher of Gematria. And again, this is a connection I've been documenting for a long time. Neil Alden Armstrong equals 93, and he died 93 months exactly before George Floyd. Now, what a lot of people don't seem to know is the meaning of the name Floyd, which comes from Welsh, meaning gray or gray-haired. And this technically connects him to the moon, as the moon is gray, and Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk on the moon. Well, 93 months is also 2,830 days, which matches the moon, and 666, which is, of course, a huge number to NASA. So let's look more at the gematria of the word sacrifice. Because George Floyd was born in the year 73, and then he died at the age of 46. Well, what are the odds? Both of these numbers are also found in the value of sacrifice, 73 and 46. Ritual sacrifice, also a 73. But this goes even deeper. Ritual sacrifice sums to 154, just like George. And if you measure the number of days between the birth of George Floyd and the man who allegedly caused his death, Derek Chauvin, you get the 154th prime number of days. So, of course, there's more to unpack with George Floyd, but what I want to focus on is how this connects to the blackout that occurred in Spain on the 28th of April last month. But do keep this number 28 in mind, because this is what really drives everything home. First, I want to point out how Mercury and Palou share gematria of 331. And Palou's team owner, Chip Ganassi, turned 67 years old one day before the race. And 331, that's the 67th prime number. 67 also connected to human sacrifice and blood sacrifice, but also the phrase total solar eclipse. When George Floyd died, Chip Ganassi, or Floyd Ganassi, was 257 mercs old. The name George Perry Floyd Jr. shares 257 reverse gematria with total solar eclipse and blood sacrifice. If you measure from the date he was choked to death, so to speak, to the date of the blackout in Spain and Portugal, we get exactly 257 weeks. So a lot of numbers connected to the sacrifice code that I discuss in many of my videos. And a further clue that this blackout is connected to George Floyd is the gematria of Iberian Peninsula, which, using the Sumerian method, which multiplies the alphabetic order by 6, the first perfect number and the number most associated with time, Iberian Peninsula equals 1014, which is similar to George Floyd's birthday, October 14th, or 1014. Now, I typically wouldn't use this cipher for this word, but in reverse caps, which maintains the alphabetic order, but mixes capital letters in with small letters, notice how the word blackout equals 261. And this is, of course, connected to the eclipse over the United States of America, which also has a 261 in the alphabetic order. Well, George Floyd was exactly 26 years and 1 month older than Monaco winner Lando Norris. And when Norris picked up the checkered flag in Monte Carlo, it was exactly 261 weeks after Floyd's death. And I hope it goes without saying the symbolism of the word blackout with the death of a famous black person. In previous work I did on George Floyd, I discussed how it was all synced up to the Martin Luther King assassination from 1968. The latter story is essentially a numerical recreation of the first one. And a huge clue of this was Derek Chauvin's age on the date he reportedly killed George Floyd. We're told that Chauvin was 44 years and 68 days old for the incident that he was accused of. And that's essentially the assassination date of Martin Luther King, April 4th, or 4/4 of the year 68. Furthermore, when you use his full name, George Perry Floyd, without the junior, you get 1929, which is the year that Martin Luther King was born. This standard cipher of gematria, also very significant, similar to Latin, but uses the current 26-letter alphabet. So check my blog out for more on that, but what I want to point out is how the word blackout also equals 85 in the standard alphabetic order. And measuring from Yale's 322nd anniversary in 2023 to the date of these races was exactly 85 weeks. Noteworthy that Yale also equals 85 with capital letters. So does Spain. And with the S exception, so does total solar eclipse. And next year, the only total solar eclipse in 2026 ends over the nation of Spain. Now, how do we prove this connection here between this and the Indy 500? Well, if you fast forward to the date of that eclipse in 2026, notice how this eclipse begins brown lunation number 1282. Every new moon since 1923 has been numbered. And here we see number 1282. Well, on the date he won the Indianapolis 500, Alex Palou was 10,282 days of age. These digits are also very similar to the date of the eclipse, which is the 12th of August, or 1208. Not only was Alex Palou 128 weeks old when pole sitter Robert Schwartzman was born, but when George Floyd was killed, Palou was exactly 1,208 weeks old. 1208, again, exactly like the date of the eclipse over his homeland of Spain. So now let's look at the number 28. Because the blackout in Spain happened on the 28th day of the month, but that's not all. The phrase for total solar eclipse in Hebrew equals 280. The sum of Mercury's magic square, we've been talking a lot about Mercury. Add every square of this together and you get a sum of 2080. Mercury's sidereal period is 28 days longer than its orbital period. Well, on the date of the blackout in Spain, Alex Palou was a span of 28 years and 28 days old. I must admit it's curious that the word blackout and eclipse both equal 28 in Chaldean numerology. Well, the Indy 500 was a span of 28 days after the blackout. And forget all these other ciphers for a second. If you look at just the simplest form of Gematria, the standard alphabetic order, the name Alex Palou equals the 28th prime number, 107. Now, this blackout was not something I covered on my channel. However, over on Cody's channel, he's been taking a deep dive essentially into a lot of these recent blackouts and how it's connected to the new papacy and a number of other events currently going on. Something else that stood out is that when Alex Palou sees the 2026 eclipse over his home nation of Spain, he'll be 10,725 days old. Well, when George Floyd died, he was 17,025 days old, which has the same 5 digits, mostly even in the same order. These are also numbers connected to Jesus Christ and the number 666, which is the sum of the magic square of the sun. Jesus, of course, the Son of God. And I think the big thing that connects George Floyd to the Martin Luther King story is that back in the 90s, this man came forward and claimed to be the key conspirator in the MLK assassination. And his name was Lloyd, which is, of course, not Floyd, but Floyd does come from the name Lloyd, which means gray. In fact, if you measure from the assassination of Martin Luther King to the Indy 500 this year, notice how you get 51 days after the 57th anniversary. 5751. And what did I say is gray? It's the moon. The word moon sums to both 57 and 51. So I do find that rather curious. But check out this guy's name, Lloyd Jowers. In the Latin method of Gematria, the name Jowers equals 1725, which matches George Floyd's age when he died, and Alex Palou's age for the eclipse over Spain. So it is unfortunate that some people still discredit the eclipse code when it comes to sports and mainstream media, but You know, there aren't too many other videos I've made that prove its significance, I believe, than what you're seeing here. Now, if you measure from Floyd's death to the date of that eclipse over Spain, you get 2,270 days. That's the Hebrew value of total solar eclipse. Or I guess total eclipse to be more accurate, 227, a huge number connected to the circle. And the Indy 500 was held in America, United States of America, 227, in Hebrew as well. Now, whether you write out eclipse, eclipse of the sun, or eclipse the sun, they all sum to 69. The University Yale also sums to 69. And not only does George Perry Floyd equal 69, but if you add the junior, his name also sums to 69 in Chaldean. And on the date of the Indy 500, Floyd would have been exactly 690 orbits of the moon old for the race. And again, we just pointed out the moon connection to the MLK assassination, which George Floyd is undoubtedly connected to. The number 69 is connected to the moon as well, because the only sign on the zodiac ruled by the moon is Cancer, whose symbol is very similar to the number 69. And on the same day as the race in Indianapolis, which has the 69, Norris wins the race in Monte Carlo, Monaco. Both of those equal 69. IndyCar even 690. Now, another significant eclipse number, maybe significant is a stretch, but it is related to this code, is the number 857. You might be thinking, well, why is that? It's a pretty big number, 857. Well, 857 days is exactly 29 lunar phases. And it's very, very rare to find two total eclipses, either solar or lunar, that are more than 857 days apart. Occasionally, you'll get some that are like 34 or 35 lunar phases apart, but this is usually the maximum, 857. And George Floyd and Alex Palou were born 8,570 days apart. But this number is also found in the Gematria of IndyCar 857 standard. IndyCar is also 444, a really big number to Skull and Bones. The race in Indianapolis was 444 days before the eclipse over Spain. Alex Palou's birth numerology connects to the Gematria of Derek Chauvin. And just some interesting alignments I put at the end of my post here. Don't forget, guys, even though I'm going to be doing fewer videos going forward, most likely, the blog is just as active as ever. And if you don't have this bookmarked rather than my YouTube channel, please do so. I've got like 12 posts since I did my last video, a few of which we looked at in here. But this is my focus. This is my true baby here, is the blog. And it's what I'll be focusing most of my work on as we move forward. I will be hopping back on YouTube occasionally when there's particularly noteworthy stories. This sync with the Indy 500 was especially intriguing to me, especially since it was a riddle that we picked up on ahead of time. So if you missed this video I did with Cody last week on the squared circle and the death of Jim Irsay and the Pacers, definitely check it out. Because for everything I have good to share, Cody has like 1 or maybe like 1.1 also. And I think those are pretty good videos. But that'll do it for this one. Again, if you want to read up on more, check the links down below in the description. And yeah, I'll be signing off. So thanks to everybody for the continued love and support. If you would like to throw your weight behind this quote-unquote movement, which is kind of a silly term, just trying to keep a website active so people can decode the mainstream narratives that are being thrown at them on a daily basis. A link for that is down below in the description as well. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Peace, love, God bless. This has been the Gematrinator. We'll talk to you next time. See ya.